walked in here, my thoughts were like, Elohi, Elohi, lama sabachthani.
Why?
Because of the smell
Oh gosh,
that we're
I'm
now
sorry.
all stuck in. This is why you turn the fan on. This is such a classic you mistake, too. This is why you turn the fan on, dude, when you cook. It's not just for mistakes. It's for just a regular thing, too. But you happen to have made a mistake. Tell everyone what the mistake you made was.
I burnt eggs. And now the house smells like burnt eggs, which is also a sulfuric smell, which is really pungent and terrible. It smells like farts.
Eggs in general are like a really aromatic food. You can smell them in any state that they're in. That's why rotten eggs is like the smell that they artificially put in gas lines. So when there's a leak, people smell it like right away.
I screwed up.
It's okay. I forgive you. And the listeners forgive you because they can't smell it right now.
You want me to light a candle? I can light a candle.
I'd actually be down for a candle. You have a couple over there, but they're religious.
Yeah, they're exercise and blessed candles.
But are they scented? Will there be sage?
There's a bit of a scent, but it's gonna smell like a church.
I feel like that's appropriate.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Let me give me a sec.
Welcome to the Forest Creek Podcast. Today we're talking about Mark Wahlberg's 40-day challenge.
In other words, Lent.
Yeah, we're talking about Lent. It's the Lentcast. Maybe we'll do these once a year. Depends on how they're received. This is a secular podcast. I'm going to tell you that up front. This has always been a secular podcast. It's a secular pursuit. But I like to dive into spiritual topics every once in a while. And you know, in the higher realm of philosophy, the spiritual and the secular are not different, not separate.
Yeah,
I
think that's true.
Our last big spiritual topic was we spoke with Father AP, who actually has a whole guide program for Lent, and it's Orthodox Lent. We'll probably put that link in the description or something, maybe with a link to our previous episodes with him. Well, it's Lent.
It is Lent.
What is Lent?
A season celebrated or followed by Christians, and it is an imitation of the 40 days that Jesus spent in the desert prior to starting his ministry. And so he went into the desert, as the gospel says. He spent 40 days
Fasting.
Yeah.
And this wasn't like fasting like intermittent fasting. It wasn't fasting like being a vegan. It was nothing.
Yeah. And so,
which is that even humanly possible? Not speaking for Jesus, but for either of us. If we just started the clock right now, we probably wouldn't live.
Probably not.
No.
Probably not. But the spiritual significance of fasting is not just noted in that gospel passage, but it's actually throughout the entire Old Testament. You see figures in the Bible, whenever they're in a state of fasting is actually when they have an encounter with the divine. And so being in a state of fasting is almost, to some degree, at least scripture seems to suggest, one of the prerequisites or one of the ways in which man becomes more sensitive to spirits, because obviously you're denying the flesh, so it's less world, less body, and consequently more spirit.
I mean, if I was to put my internet hat on, I would be like, yeah, when you deprive yourself of food, you'll be more prone to hallucinations.
Well, I think there's a certain phase of fasting where that legitimately starts to take place, for sure.
Yeah.
I knew a guy, he fasted for a week, literally did not eat anything for a whole week. He said the first day was tough. He had like a really bad migraine.
Yeah.
Second day, kind of similar, but not as bad. And the third day, he's like, he had the most amazing focus that he's ever had in his entire life. Like, he got so much work done.
Because his brain is like engaged to find food.
Well, no, because I think he accesses fat stores. So now he's like in a kind of, I guess, a ketosis or whatever. And so his head is like, he was just so laser focused, got so much work done. And you literally feel like you're in this like enlightened state.
Yeah, when go on any kind of fast or any very restrictive diet for the first few days, you'll probably encounter a very, very strong migraine or headache, and that's part of your withdrawal from like sugars.
Exactly, yeah. So you'll probably go low and potentially even high. You have about, it depends on the person, but anywhere from 1,500 calories worth of glucose stored in your body. So a good portion of that is in your liver, and then the rest of it's distributed throughout your muscles. And so when you're fasting, your body's going to burn all of that. And so you're probably going to start to feel weak, like physically weak, because those sugars are being burned from your muscles. And then eventually it's going to take from your liver. And once those are through, it's going to start to eat the fat.
Funny enough, the practice of Lent itself, it was never written anywhere the way that communion is, where Jesus instructs the disciples or anybody around him to do this specifically. And it wasn't even the disciples themselves that ended up instructing it. As a formal practice, it only really started to arise a few hundred years afterwards.
Really?
Yeah, it was a early practice by the early Christians. It wasn't formally done.
I know that, like, for example, like fasting as a religious practice, that's not even just a Christian thing. This is
that's very widespread.
It's widespread because I think that there's a universal experience that when you fast, you discipline the flesh, which allows you to focus on the immaterial things more.
There's a great example of this, the story of Gautama Buddha, the first Buddha, I guess it would be Siddhartha. He's sitting in the jungle. When he's on his path to Buddhism, he is just literally sitting there and meditating day and night. And even before that, he went from like wide withdrawals of food, because his thing is he started as a prince, maximum pleasure, and he was like, I want to experience the full spectrum of life, and he went the exact opposite way and did complete withdrawals, right? And it was only going all that way to the bottom and then starting to rise back up to the middle that he kind of found Buddhism,
Interesting,
yeah. But fasting and spirituality is like very prevalent.
Yeah, and so a key aspect, at least for Christian fasting, is that I spoke to a monk once, and he talked about how there's the fasting of Christians, and then there's the fasting of demons, which many Christians will do, which is basically they fast, so they don't eat, but then they also don't pray. And so they say, well, demons don't eat either, and they also don't pray. So they say it's like it's called the fast of demons. So if you're gonna fast, it's equally and even more important to pray. So if you're going in a state where you're going, let's say 12 hours or more, intentionally you're giving up food as a sacrifice.
There needs to be.
You have to supplement that with prayer. So where you would maybe normally be eating food, instead of eating food, you should maybe be praying.
It's almost like
a different kind of food.
An element to your fasting needs to be spirituality. You need to have some kind of spiritual practice, whether it's meditation, whether it is praying or like reading gospels, or however you incorporate it, because without that, you're solely focused on the physical.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the root of a lot of people's like eating disorders.
I literally experienced that. I did intense fasting, not for any spiritual purposes, purely for like physical, like it was all like just dieting and stuff. And yeah, because you're totally focused on the material, you're not really focused on trying to redirect your, I guess, attention to something higher or different. You're just like, I was just constantly thinking about food, constantly thinking about the body, diet, and all this stuff, and the mechanics of what's going on in my body. And that basically just turned me into a hypochondriac. Really, that's all. And then you end up almost developing a sort of fear of food.
Well, to be fair, you were kind of neurotic before and after.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not gonna argue with that.
There's a Japanese philosopher, swordsman, samurai that Jared and I reference all the time, Miyamoto Musashi, author of the Book of Five Rings and subject of the graphic novel series Vagabond.
An amazing work.
Incredible. We do have a podcast planned about it, but he did write this other rule set at one point that didn't get formally published. It was called The Way of Walking Alone, or The Way of Self-Reliance, where he wrote down the rules that people should follow if they're going to try to pick up his style. And one of them was never fast for physical appearance. Never fast for your body alone. Fasting is something that should be done for the mind. And in his case, it was like accompanied with very intense focus towards martial arts practice. and like Zen study.
I like that.
So it's interesting that it is a thing of ancient wisdom that, like, if you're gonna fast, you also do need to incorporate that other focus, that other mental, mindful practice in some way or another, whether it is spiritual or not. And this is part of what I want to talk about in the podcast today, is that, like, Lent doesn't have to be just for the Christians.
Well, I think the Christians will celebrate a different kind of Lent because it has a very intentional, rooted, and actually it's obligatory, right? For Christian, or at least for Catholics. I can't speak for. It's definitely obligatory for Christians and or particularly Catholics. But in terms of the general season of basically going through a period of time where you give something up, I mean, you see this because again, I think this is not a wisdom which is esoteric. It's so far from that. It is, I think, metaphysically basic and very accessible to human reason to basically observe that when I give things up, and I increase in the virtues of like discipline, I free up my mind to focus on what is more important, because so much of our life is like temporal things, right? This meal, that meal, this, and that's the thing. Fasting, it's not just food, right? People are encouraged to give up other things, like maybe, like, for example, I gave up YouTube. I can't tell you how much time I have now because I stopped. I don't watch YouTube videos now, so like every time I'm tempted to do it, I'm like, I can't do that. So I supplement with something else, and I'm reading books now, and reading is way more edifying than YouTube. YouTube is like a very passive kind of. Honestly, I feel like I lose brain cells. It's just scrolling in these YouTube shorts or whatever. Ever since they brought those shorts, it's completely just ruined me.
Jared's been doing the practice for at least a couple years now where he gives up music. Yeah, last couple times he did it, he was like very adamant about it. It's like, I won't be around it if I can. And now it's like, if I'm not gonna purposely turn on music. And he's kind of found a bit of a healthier balance to it. Yeah,
like one of the things that he described to me was that like a sort of a sense of liberation, because before there was this feeling like he like needed it. But now he can enjoy it without feeling like he needs it, which is, he feels more free and he can actually enjoy it more, because it's not like I need music. I can enjoy it. I can be in the presence of it, but I can live without it.
Next year,
more in control.
Next year, I'll just let you and Jared do this podcast, and I'll give up podcasting. I'll just stop listening to everything. That's probably, that would be a strange one for me to give up podcasts, because I listen to at least a couple hours a day. But we should probably dive in a little bit just to give people a little bit of an overview to the history of Lent. Because, like we said, it is a practice that emerges in Christianity, and it spans from Ash Wednesday for 40 days, well, in most denominations, for 40 days.
Give or take.
Until Easter, or otherwise Holy Saturday.
Yeah, they have the Holy Triduum, right? Which is Good Friday, and then you have, I forgot.
Is it Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Easter Monday?
No, it would be Easter Sunday.
Easter Sunday.
Because it's the 3 days, right? So like, Christ dies on Friday, and then he's in the tomb, and then on Easter Sunday is the resurrection. Which is arguably the most important day for Christians.
And then we get Monday off. That's an important one.
Well, that's what the secular world cares about.
It's pretty important for us religious folks too.
To get a stat day. It's interesting because we used to have a lot more stats, like way, way, way more stat days. And a lot of them were because of feast days. But actually, what's interesting is that as our culture has become more secular, we have less and less stat days. And people don't like that. And they're realizing that it's not even good for the economy. Because if people are always working, they're never spending money. Right? So having a balance,
have a day
even
off.
Just purely, like, if you see, they're always material reasons. They're never spiritual. They're pretty much always material reasons.
For my American friends, who cares what Columbus did? Take the day off. We should have a Hitler. I'm kidding. Imagine if I said we should have a Hitler day. Well, it would be 420, so I don't think a lot of people would be upset.
It's so wild that became a thing. What's the history of that?
A 420?
Well, like, why they chose Hitler's birth, or was that like a coincidence?
I think,
or was it intentional?
It was a coincidence. Okay. I think it corresponds with like, we're almost out of work right now. Let's light up, or something.
Interesting.
But yeah, so Christianity, in most denominations, it's the 40 days from Ash Wednesday to Holy Saturday. In the Coptic tradition like mine, it's 55 days.
You guys go hardcore.
We have stuff on either side of it, really.
I have a lot of respect for the Copts.
Yeah. It's specifically in the last week of the Coptic tradition of doing it. We do the Holy Bescha week, where we go to church pretty much every night leading up to that crucifixion. And there's like a series of prayers, and inside the church, they'll turn everything black. Like they'll take down all of the festive colors and replace them with dark ones.
That's such a beautiful devotion. Like that is...
You go to church nightly, you sing the same.
It's so powerful.
Yeah, there's a lot of the Copts who will be listening to this will be like, I know that. But yeah, everybody gets really into it. It gets very somber. It's like if you were going part way through Lent, if you were like trying, you have to really try now the last week.
This is what I love about the Eastern Orthodox churches, is that they preserve the mystery in many ways so much better than the West. In the West, it just, it comes across as sort of like a to-do list. Like we just gotta check the box off. But in the East, it's like they relish. They're like, no, we're not gonna check. They're not trying to check off a tick box because they take as long as they possibly can to do anything.
Yeah.
For like 3 hours, right?
I never counted them. I don't know if I've even actually stayed for the whole thing before. We try. We show up. We get a good couple hours in.
Yeah.
We got work in the morning.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'd actually like to go one night. I really would.
You should come this year.
I was gonna say, like, if you could let me know, I'd definitely like to join for one of those nights.
Oh, for sure. In other traditions, in other Christian denominations, from what I'm familiar with, you guys just pick something to give up.
I think so. I don't know.
Are there rules for the fasting?
I don't know. I can't speak for other Christian traditions. I know for Catholics that it's really weak now. It's like really, really weak. I mean, now it's basically, in terms of mandatory, what's obligatory is there's a fast and abstinence. So abstinence meaning no meat, and a fast meaning only one meal a day on Ash Wednesday and then Good Friday. And that's literally it. And then there's a general requirement, like a moral, which is a divine. Like there's distinctions here. So there's like a eternal divine law, which is basically every baptized person is required to do penance, which basically means doing some form of self-denial in some respect throughout the entire year, like always. And so Lent is a time where you should do that a little bit more, but it's not specific. The only specific like obligatory requirements would be fasting and abstinence on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, and that's it. Traditionally it was similar to what you guys had. I mean, full vegan basically for the entirety of Lent.
No form of dairy, so no milk, no cheese, no eggs, no meats of any kind. There are other fasts where we can kind of go semi-pescatarian and have some fish, but in this one it's like, you go strict. Strict as you can. The other part to it too is that you're encouraged to give up all the vices. Don't drink. Don't
good luck.
Smoke. Don't do things for entertainment. If you are seeking to consume media, let it be Christian.
Yeah, so I find like when you really go hardcore, you encounter your weakness in a much more like impactful way. Like you don't realize just how dependent you are
to social media.
Yeah.
Okay, stop. See if you can do it for a week. Go a week without opening Instagram. A lot of people will be like, "Oh, I'm not addicted to this thing." Okay, don't do it.
We need distractions. Like we can't face reality. Just like we can't just stare at it in its face. We have to find distractions somehow. Either whether it's YouTube, or even a book, even if it's a good book, you need something to.
It's funny
to direct your mind to.
Otherwise, I've been helping my dad renovate our house for the past little while, and the whole time I'm doing it, I have an earbud in. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm listening to Joe Rogan. I'm listening to like, I don't know, whoever. As I'm going through, I even like put on a Netflix show and I just listen to episodes of a sitcom or something. Got through a lot of Young Sheldon, but
oh gosh,
my dad, when he's working, silence. I'm like, oh, it's kind of surprising.
That's boss, dude.
I'm surprised with it.
It's actually so boss.
The only times I've been kind of forced to, put my mind to is when I go for motorcycle rides in the summer. Because you don't want to put in any earbuds or anything that'll distract you. You just want to focus on the road. It's an interesting, it's funny, that's a meditative experience to me. went to a lot of guys before it was just going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before earbuds, people just lived in the moment. There wasn't a screen to look at. There wasn't a thing to listen to.
Well, that's the thing. Like so far, it's only been a week, right? Yeah, it's been officially a week because it started on last Wednesday. So it's been officially a week, and I didn't go that hardcore. I basically, because I tried to be a little bit more humble in my resolutions here, because I was like, okay, has to be challenging, but you don't want to be too challenging to the point where you basically fail and then you're like, I'm not even going to bother, because that is a temptation that will often happen. So you kind of have to find that happy medium of like, this is difficult, it's going to be hard to give up, but I think I can do it.
Yeah.
If you do too many things, and this has happened before to me, where it's like you basically just don't do any of it because it's overwhelming.
You should try the Coptic thing and just go hard the last week. Build up to it.
You know what? I'm depending on how, because right now so far it's been good. So far I haven't like YouTube. It's been going decent in terms of fasting from YouTube and a lot of social media. But maybe I'll take you up on that. Maybe last week I'll try to go hardcore and see how I do. But it's not so much like being successful in, oh, I gave up these things and I feel really proud of myself. It's more so it's actually a good thing when you encounter your weakness. That's the part that's really gonna humble you, not the success, not the like, oh, yes, I did it. I went through all of Lent and I didn't eat, meat, or I did. That could potentially actually puff you up, and you could start to feel a little bit like proud of like, wow, look at me. I'm so self-disciplined. It's sometimes it might be better to fail and then be humbled by that failure. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's funny. I don't really even go that hard the Coptic thing. You can call me lackluster if you want.
I remember. I don't know if your parents are listening to this, but you can edit this part out.
Hey, my parents were eating chocolate today. We'll wrap them out first.
I remember last year we would meet up at like late at night, and you're like, what do you want to do? And you're like, we're going to A&W. I need a burger right freaking now.
It's like, give me something now. Well, it's like I discovered with my own dietary habits that, like, even trying to eat healthier as I am now, going vegan makes me... I can't do it. I just can't live like that.
I'm kind of experiencing it now, actually.
So what I do instead is I do intermittent fasting, where I just say, like, I'll eat between 4 and 8 and that's it. Which is like a dietary thing some people do, but it's like, it's interesting. Wake up in the morning and don't have a bagel. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
So I've been able to pull that off. Even like, I'll have like a coffee or a tea, but I won't put any sugar or any milk in it. I'm pretty used to drinking black anyway, so
okay,
it's like,
same. Yeah.
Fine, but that's at least I try to do that. I try to keep up with the spiritual stuff too.
Oh, that's good. Did you give up anything like media wise? Because you're very active on the medias. Because you kind of have to be. It's like,
at this point, yeah, because like I'm listening to podcasts because I'm staying on top of podcasting, and I at least have to listen to this one. Right. And then music-wise, I don't really do much music anymore. It's not like a vice for me. It never really was. Like, I'll pump some tunes every once in a while, but like most of my day is listening to podcasts, not listening to music. So there's that. When it comes to TV, like even now, in 2023, I have probably consumed less media, played less video games, looked at less social media than any other time in my life already.
And how do you feel?
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, right?
It's odd. I think it has to do because before I was 25, most of that time I was like an Epicurean. And then turning 25, I was like, I'm going to be a Stoic now.
So for everyone listening, like, describe the differences between
the difference
two.
is Epicurean was like a spin-off of hedonism in Greek philosophy, because hedonism was maximize your pleasure. Epicurus realized, well, you have to factor in the morning after to the pleasure. You know, you have to factor in what excess makes you feel like. You have to factor the hangover to your overall pleasure.
Right.
And then what it crystallized into was Epicurus coming up with these things like, don't desire too much, be happy being in the moment, be content with what you have. And these kind of things, I tried to follow that philosophy a little bit, but it was still a very, small scale contentness.
Yeah.
Stoicism, on the other hand, they were seen as the rivals to Epicureans, even though a lot of them shared some similar beliefs and ideas.
Yeah.
I mentioned it before, like Seneca, a very popular Stoic.
Seneca is one of my favorite Stoics.
Was one of the teachers to Nero.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well,
not a glowing
Alexander the
resume.
Great was also tutored by Aristotle, and I have nothing against Aristotle. So
Yeah. Seneca used to quote Epicurus all the time as a dig. He would be like, I love quoting bad authors when they say good things. But when I turned 25, I'm like, I kind of want to try meeting some of my own ambitions. There's this story I love, and it kind of illustrates a little bit like the change I had between Epicureanism and Stoicism in a little bit of a different manner. Because one day you got Alexander the Great, and he's walking with his homies, and they're in Greece, and they're just, going through the countryside, and they come across this beggar sitting on the side of the road. And Alexander is like, you know what? I'm the most powerful dude in all of Greece. Let me see what this beggar is up to. He walks over to him and he says, my friend, I'll grant you anything you want. And the beggar, Diogenes, goes, that's great. Step out of my son.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Step out of my son. And then all the guys who were with Alexander started laughing, and they were like, this guy's nuts. He could have asked for anything. He could have asked for troves of gold, for parts of a kingdom, for anything. And Alexander hushed them, and he says, like, you know what? If I wasn't Alexander, I would be Diogenes. It's like this look at, I have been the richest in the world. I could be the poorest too. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that too. I was like, well, what if I reverse the logic a little bit? It's like, I have been Diogenes. Why not be Alexander? That was a little bit of my change.
Sort of a Wolf of Wall Street moment.
Yeah.
I've been a rich man and I've been a poor man, and I choose rich every time.
I'll choose rich now. Why not? Seeing if I can make things happen. So I went the way of like, all right, what is every good thing I can do? And I went with that Marcus Aurelius quote: if you know something is not right, don't do it. If you know it's not true, don't say it.
Mm-hmm. Easier said than done.
Of like trying to apply that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's a waste of time for me to spend looking at social media when I don't actually actively have to do something. Mm-hmm. Like, it's a challenge when one of these podcasts comes out, because I have to spend at least 20 minutes posting things.
Yeah.
And writing the descriptions and all that. At some point in the future, I'll automate it so I don't actually have to go onto the app. Mm-hmm. But you got to do engagement.
Yeah.
To some degree.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, like, for example, like, obviously we have the Forest Creek and different, channels and stuff, and for important business matters, I can't give up Discord. I thought about it, but I was like, no, I can't.
You can give up some channels.
I could probably give up some.
You probably got some servers. I got some servers.
Yeah.
That are not worth looking at.
That's a good point. Yeah, I just find like so often it's like that little dopamine rush that we're looking for when we pick up our phone, right? Like often, most often that's usually YouTube for me, but when you don't have that, you just find yourself kind of picking up your phone and like, oh wait, right, there's nothing really for me to see actually. So I'm just like refreshing my email like 100 times a day, because it's crazy. Your brain is so accustomed to that little bit of, it's like a drug. It really is like a cigarette or something. It's just so accustomed to that rush, that little bit of pleasure that you get. But when you don't have that, you're like, well, you kind of have to recalibrate, let's say.
Getting back to the facts, the word Lent comes from the Old English word Lencton, which meant springtime. Because here in March, springtime is where we actually begin it, which now in Canada is still snow. Apparently it's going to be the coldest part of our winter, which has not ended. But spring nonetheless, and that's where the word comes from. I guess it got shortened over time. Period of repentance and spiritual renewal. It was a time where new converts were baptized.
Right. Yes, that's right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
And then people started to adopt that tradition of observing those 40 days of fasting, at least to a mortal way of doing it, because, again, you would die. Mm-hmm. You probably would die.
Yeah, and I think that's a key difference between the kind of modern man compared to previous generations that celebrated these traditions. Because in previous times, death was so day to day, and there was like a liturgy of death, you know what I mean? Like, you had to personally, like, if your father died, most likely you and your family would have to deal with the body directly. There wasn't like a mortician or somebody you would send the body off to deal with it.
Most of our modern funeral practices were popularized during the American Civil War.
Interesting.
The parlor at your house used to be the funeral parlor, where you would prepare your dead bodies of your family before you buried them.
And so, yeah, we don't really, that liturgy of death isn't like, we're not as involved in that ritual anymore. And so death is, yeah, death is not as apparent to us as it used to be, or at least it's not in your face as much as it was back then. Like back then, it really did, I think, feel like, you know, what was the life expectancy? Maybe if you were lucky, 70. And so given that, you know, time was condensed and...
Well, it's funny because when you read the Bible, like the early books of the Bible was like, what, 200? And then...
Well, we don't know, like, what the
common
reference for a
medieval
year
peasant, 30. Like, it got pretty short pretty quick.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. So when you don't have that much time, and you know you don't have that much time, and people are coming and going before your eyes all the time, and you're encountering dead bodies almost daily or weekly, I think the spirit of Lent becomes a lot more like supercharged, where you're like, I gotta get my act together and I gotta prepare for eternity here.
So a question I got from a friend when starting this off, and it's funny because my boss came around with a bunch of chocolates and he was offering it to everyone in the office, and he came over to me. I was like, oh, I can't. And he's like, oh, why not? I was like, oh, I'm in the middle of Lent. He's like, oh, what's that? And I kind of explained to him what I'm doing and how people do it. And he's like, oh, a friend has a thing of that. He says he can't eat until midnight. I was like, oh, that's Ramadan. And then later on, when I was preparing for this podcast, somebody asked me, what is the differences? What are the core differences between Lent and Ramadan? Well, the practices are almost entirely different in the rules. But a lot of the ideas remain very similar, right? It's you're withdrawing from the things, the physical vices, the things that are giving you pleasure here in the physical world, or even satisfaction, and then you are going towards the things that are spiritually satisfying. I just listened to an imam on Lex Friedman's podcast, and he was talking about Lent. He was actually like, in the same way you were, it was like, it feels freeing. You'd think that, oh, we're sitting in the middle of a really hot day on Texas, we're not having a drink or even a glass of lemonade, and we're waiting for nighttime, and then still we feel awesome because we're kind of free.
Well, the sense of freedom, it's important to understand like what freedom really is. But it's not the ability to just say yes to everything, but it's actually the ability to say no. So when you have certain urges, like an urge for this food or an urge for this pleasure or that pleasure, and your ability to say no and not be devastated by that, that's freedom. And you feel it too. You're like, you feel more in control, you feel more at peace, because you don't have to give in to the ever-changing, always something more, you know, the lower faculties, the passions, which are always pointing in different directions, right? Like, hey, I want this food, or hey, let's, you know, get this pleasure. And if you're constantly having to chase those things to satiate those passions, then that actually ends up turning more into sort of a slavery, right? Because your higher faculty, like your reason and your mind, and the things which are higher, like truth, beauty, and goodness, those are the things which we're ultimately made for, at least I would say. And if you're constantly having to chase the lower things like food, you know, different types of pleasure constantly, then you never have the time to, you know, meditate and think about the things which are not passing. So I know, I totally agree. And that's like, it's a very palpable experience when you first do it. I think I tried, and this is even before Christianity. It was more like I was just doing it again because I think it's something, this is a wisdom which is not reserved for religious people, 100% not. It's something which anybody with the light of reason can observe the human person, observe just through experience, that when they deny themselves, there's a sense of reward, there's a sense of delight in being able to say no.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. We mentioned it a couple times before. Jocko Willink, ex-Navy SEAL, does his own pretty awesome podcast. He has this slogan, one of his books, discipline equals freedom. That when you have the discipline, and it's not just a thing, because you think about it with time, it's like, oh, I'm not going to waste time watching TV. Now I have all this freedom because I have, a bunch of time on my hands. The same thing is true when you're not tied down to eating a certain way or being attached to certain vices. You have a certain degree of freedom because of it. So the discipline that Lent encourages, and the discipline that Lent, like fasting and exercises, and just disciplinary exercises in general, what they end up doing is actually making you more free. When you look at people who are trying to keep to like a very strict regimen, you're like, oh, that person's tied down by a set of rules, and what's worse is those rules are imposed by them. But that's discipline.
Right.
right? It's hard to tell one thing from another sometimes, but
Yeah. Well, the older I get, the more I actually love, not crappy rules, but rules. Like I think we need order. We need some sort of
you need to clean your room.
some sort of rule of life, right?
You need to pet cats on the street.
And it's crazy. Like your body and your brain absolutely love it.
Buy my book. That was Jordan Peterson.
I mean, Peterson really, he's not saying anything new. I think he can articulate old ideas in ways which are very,
that's like his thing.
He's a good teacher.
Yeah.
But he's not reinventing the wheel.
I'd say he's a specifically good teacher now because he's more sane now.
Mm-hmm.
He had some rough years behind him.
Well,
But you put any amount of media on anybody, they're not gonna be awesome. Didn't work out for Britney Spears.
I actually feel like Peterson's kind of gone off the deep end, to be completely honest with you.
Wow. I feel like you've gone off the deep end.
Maybe.
You've become a little bit radical,
Really?
I'm kidding. Kind of. In terms of acting in a disciplinary manner, choosing to do something disciplinary to enhance not just your physiology, right? Not just the dieting to lose weight. Because even if you are dieting to lose weight, what is the thing that all the real good trainers tell you? It's not, hey, you got to get rid of that. See that fat on you? You got to get rid of it.
Right.
It's change your mindset, change your habits, change the way that you look at cake.
Well, it's mind over matter, right? And so the power of the mind, which is going to inform the will, and the will is ultimately that superpower that humans have, right? You really put your will into it, and it starts to feel like you can push boundaries that you didn't think were possible. I think we're a lot more resilient and we're a lot more capable than we give ourselves credit for. You're capable of a lot more, and you can go through a lot more than you think. But you have to put your will into it. And so, I can see, like, especially if you're trying to lose it like 100 pounds or something crazy weight, like that's going to require, like, you're going to be not just physically different by the end of that journey. Guaranteed mentally you will have transformed, right? So it's not just, and actually maybe that's the more important thing. And I think a lot of people who've lost a crazy amount of weight will attest to that it's not so much the physical transformation that makes them, happier or more, feel, again, like mentally better. But I think it's the mental aspect of like how their mind has had to change. You have to become a different person in some sense. And this is where sometimes there's like that self-hypnosis, which becomes a thing. You almost have to hypnotize yourself to get through some of these hard...
Well, I mean, if you think about hypnosis, you're just trying to develop a new neural pathway. Because you're always using the same neural pathway to get something done. When you're hypnotizing, or say trying to come up with a new mindset, what you're essentially physically trying to do is figure out a new neural pathway in your brain to get the same thing done. Right, you're looking at a piece of food.
So like a mind hack.
Literally. Yeah. We actually, I spoke a little while ago to a guy who was funding research that I won't talk too much about it because I want him to do it eventually on the podcast. But basically, it's like it's a brain therapy where they put this thing on your brain, and basically you watch a computer screen with a cartoon on it, and then the color starts fading. If you're using the same loops in your brain that you always do, it's going to keep fading. So it encourages you to think about it in different ways, in more positive ways and more constructive ways, in order to regain color to the screen.
That's so interesting.
And by doing this training, you're training yourself to break out of your loops. And that's what they do for like addicts and people with like serious depression and stuff like that, to get them out of that cycle of thinking.
Breaking out of the cycle. I find what's like our brain and the way that we're designed, it's like it's so pattern centered. It's so pattern oriented. We love like the brain loves patterns. And so like, for example, like getting up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, eating at the same time, like all these consistent patterns your body will just adapt to, and it loves it. Like it'll be ready to go, like it'll be ready for these things throughout the day.
Animals of habit.
Creatures of absolutely. And I mean, that's how virtues come, through habit. Good habits become virtues, bad habits become vices. And so there's that ancient wisdom, which is basically, it all starts in the mind, which is your thoughts. So you have to watch your thoughts, because your thoughts become actions, and watch your actions, because your actions become habits, and watch your habits, because your habits will become virtues or vices. and watch your virtues or vices because that'll form your character, and watch your character because your character will forge your destiny.
Wow.
So it all goes back to that thought. It all goes back to, is this a good decision? Should I do this or should I do that? And that's the thing, is sometimes we don't spend enough time to take that short, brief moment of pause and say, is this the person I want to be?
Was that you who came up with that, or you quoting
No, I didn't
Lewis?
I can't take credit for that.
Come
This
on,
is
man.
ancient wisdom.
Oh, it's ancient wisdom.
This is like Aristotle talks
that.
about that.
Yeah, probably. That's very true.
You know?
Hey, Aristotle was surprised. What is the Catholics call him? The something pagan?
They call him the master of all who know. So, for example, in Dante's Inferno, Aristotle's like, technically he's in hell because he wasn't a baptized Christian, but like, it's more so, Dante's Inferno is more so like an understanding of, it's actually really it is a artistic depiction of Thomism. That's actually the best way I would describe Dante's Inferno.
On the topic of mind over matter, it's ancient, like you say, ancient wisdom.
Yeah.
Another piece of ancient wisdom that kind of illustrates the same thing. And I'll probably do another episode about this too. This is a great treasure trove of episodes. Magic, ancient Hermeticism. You'll see that arcane illustration of the pentagram, a 5-pointed star. Well, what does that mean? The stars to the side, the left, right, and the lower ones, those are supposed to be earth, wind, fire, and water, the 4 avatar elements. And the one on top is supposed to signify mind. And the reason why you keep it upright is because you have mind over matter. So what do you see when people start doing the practice of Satanism? Because what does Satan do? He flips it upside down.
Interesting.
And he puts matter over mind.
Right.
So it's an interesting way to look at it. It's like, well, what are you doing that's indulging matter in your life? What are your vices? Because those are the things that are indulging matter. What are the virtues? Those are the things that indulge your mind. And if you want the balance of the world to be right, if you want the star to remain upright, you need to do that mind over matter practice.
In today's world, I would definitely argue we are completely inversed. Maybe I think there was a period of time where it was potentially arguably too much mind and not enough matter. They didn't care enough about the material world to the point where it was basically just too much maybe thinking and not enough maybe acting or engaging with the material world. And then now I think we're completely like in the other end of that, which is basically it's an obsession over the material things, but not really understanding the meaning behind them. And so Aristotle talks about form and matter, and it's form in matter. So form being immaterial and matter being material. So our senses, our 5 senses picks up the matter, but our intellect, our mind picks up the form. And the form is sort of the idea of the thing, the meaning of the thing. And so I feel as though in this time that we're living in, where basically it's so much pleasure because it's so accessible, and our senses are so overloaded, we're so overstimulated because of, media, even with DoorDash and Uber Eats, like you can get excellent food brought right to your door in like a second. It's like we live like kings. Even like kings, hundreds of years ago didn't live as well as like a lot of the average person in the West today.
Yes.
And so that overstimulation, I think, is causing us to lose contact with the form of the thing.
It's so easy to go matter over mind nowadays.
Yeah.
But I have a solution.
I mean, you can shut it off, right?
I have a solution. This is a very easy way. And the solution stars Mark Wahlberg. The Hallow App. Oh man, I've been seeing ads for that everywhere.
We should promote it because I have it. It's a good app.
Really?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I can't remember how much it costs. It doesn't cost that much. It's cheaper than Netflix, I think.
You have to pay for spirituality?
No, so there's a free version.
Yeah.
There's a free version.
But does Mark read to you in the free version?
I think he has some. He has some
okay.
available. But the paid version has a lot more options available, way more things on it. And in the paid version, they have like Lenten challenges, daily prayers, meditations, scripture readings, music, different types of music, study music, Gregorian chant, you name it. They pretty much, and they keep adding more.
Is it a Catholic specific app?
It's the #1 Catholic prayer app, but I think it's actually now the #1 prayer app just in general.
Interesting.
It's going to be most useful to Catholics because there's a lot of very Catholic prayers there, but there's going to be things for, I think, maybe potentially everybody, especially with some of the music. Like Gregorian chant in particular has been proven to be incredibly healthy for the mind. So they've done
a vibe Gregorian chants. That's why I always pick the lo-fi for these episodes. Always has Gregorian chants in it. I love it.
It's because, and actually what's interesting, there's a good conference on the human soul by a bishop. I recommend it, but basically he goes into the human soul, which is very, very much Aristotle's understanding of the human soul. And then he also talks about how music affects the different faculties of the human soul. For example, music with a lot of drums tends to affect the lower appetites.
Yeah.
So and we know this like throughout history, when they're about to go to war, what do they have? They have a lot of drums because it excites those irascible passions of fight.
It puts you on a beat,
you know.
And your heart beats, so you feel like you're on a rhythm.
Yeah, and so the flesh, it's more body. But then there's other music like classical and Gregorian chant, which appeals more to the mind. And so that kind of lifts the mind up. It's not as necessarily pleasurable to the senses, but it's more pleasurable
melody,
to the...
some chorus, some chords. These things are more ethereal.
Yeah, exactly. There's more melody and harmony being the two that will typically, generally are more associated with like mind.
Interesting.
But then things with like a lot of bass, you know, a lot of
and the
like
best
drums.
music, we consider some of the best music does a lot of both.
Yeah, that's really interesting, is seeing how some songs seem to have both.
It's funny, I think about like my favorite guitarist, Jimi Hendrix. You listen to his lead guitar, he is making the guitar sing and speak to you. But then there's also a lot of portions of those songs where he's just going all pure rhythm on it. So it's like the mix of both heighten the music quite a bit. I think that's true of a lot of music too.
Yeah.
But speaking of bishops, Bishop Robert Barron endorsed Hallow App, apparently. I've been seeing him in the ads now, too. It's like him and Mark Wahlberg.
They've teamed up. The media Catholic influencer duo there.
Are you a fan of Bishop Barron?
Yeah, I like his stuff. I watched a lot of it in the beginning. I don't really watch his stuff as much anymore. I don't want to say like I grew out of him.
Is he like one of those entry point influencers that gets people back into Catholicism?
So there's like you know that image of the iceberg where you have like that little part that's like above the surface, and you have this deep portion. Bishop Barron is like closer to the top.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
And you go really, really deep, and eventually you're in sedevacantism.
Yeah, he shows up on all the podcasts, does all that stuff. I feel like there's quite a few priests that do that. Like I saw a monk who has a YouTube channel. It's like a really well produced YouTube channel, and he's like giving this whole. He did an entire video where he was like, I don't own any of this. This is all stuff that was paid for by the church. I just work on it. I just do this stuff.
Yeah, like I think there's a lot of good content online, like good thinkers. Jonathan Pageau's a good one. I think he's got the Symbolic World podcast. I like listening to that. But I find these days I'm more drawn into reading like good books. Particularly right now, I'm actually really into literature. Because reading like nonfiction is good. I think in terms of understanding things maybe abstractly or like concrete facts, but there's something about literature where you see these ideas play out in a story.
Well, that's great. I lent you like a million books. So. Yeah,
I mean, I'm Watchmen. I'll probably finish Watchmen this night. I'm not on YouTube.
That's a great piece of literature.
It is.
By the way, I love Alan Moore. Speaking of magic and ancient hermetics, Alan Moore is a wizard, like an actual wizard.
A literal wizard.
There's other very popular disciplinary challenges that people do. And I'm speaking strictly about secular ones now. So a lot of people do dry January, for instance.
Oh, like no alcohol?
I imagine that's a thing that a lot of people love to commit to after New Year's. They're like, I'm never doing this again, or at least for another 30 days.
Yeah,
a lot of people do dry January. Sober October has been a thing. A lot of people started, like it was started a long time ago, but it was adopted by Joe Rogan, and now it is done I think a lot of people are encouraged to do that because they're listening to a major celebrity on a podcast talk about it, and he's doing it. And he changes it up every once in a while. Like they do no alcohol, but then they throw in other things. No drugs, no, you have to work out. You have to meet a certain workout challenge, or you have to meet a certain like goal with an activity or something. And they went really hard a few times. They did, apparently Joe did the carnivore diet for the entirety of one of them.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, I think he said it was quite good. Like he felt pretty good on it.
Yeah, it's probably pretty amazing. Like when you get to that level of dietary fasting and just extreme exercise, you're probably like awakening something really deep inside your brain.
Yeah.
From all of that.
I did try carnivore for a little bit. I didn't feel great on it, to be perfectly honest. I think for me it was like the heart palpitations.
It's funny.
It's so much protein. I've never been a big meat eater. I love meat, like I like it, but like in my dish, typically maybe a third of it's gonna be meat, and the rest of it's gonna be like maybe veggies or carbs or fat or whatever. But like to have your entire meal be just like heavy protein, it's like you eat that once and then you're hungry later. You eat it, or maybe I'm not eating enough, but even like in that one sitting, it's like my heart is like, even when I went to bed, it's like pounding. I'm getting like heart palpitations. It's too much protein.
2020, the summer of 2020, the Lent of 2020 is when I started the keto diet.
How long did you do it for?
I probably did keto for like 2.5 months.
Okay,
I lost like 30 pounds. I loved it, by the way. Like it was definitely hard sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard.
Because I would walk by a Kit Kat bar and like literally feel it in my mouth. But, and like just, it's weird, the smells of everything become way more.
Did you notice your teeth got whiter?
Yes.
Like I noticed that when I did keto for about 3 months, and yeah, like my teeth, they were like, they've never been whiter because there's no sugar. When you have zero sugar, it's like your teeth just start.
And it would be hard for most of the day, but then you'd come down, you'd grill a steak and you'd be like, oh, this is all worth it. I used to do like cheese boats. I would fill cottage cheese into like bell peppers and stuff. I loved it. I was having a great time on keto. But that same thing happened where I was focused on doing it to lose weight.
Right.
I wasn't doing it to change my habits.
Right.
And I practically went right back to what I was doing before. And lo and behold, during 2022, like I was slowly gaining back that weight. And I thought I'd gotten to like a healthy spot. And then 2022 came along and I just, like I gained it back more than I was before I did keto. And now I'm doing it like when I'm fasting, when I'm doing intermittent fasting, when I'm avoiding unhealthy food. It's not like a very hard restrictive diet. And at the same time, it's also not a thing that I'm doing purely for physical. I'm doing it like I'm trying to train myself to make healthier decisions in general. Work out more, spend less time on social media. So it's like a partial spiritual, partial material thing, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm finding this is a lot healthier.
It's fuller.
Yeah.
It's fuller. You're not just focusing on one part of yourself. It's like the whole person because you're one thing, right? You're not.
If you are fighting to become more disciplined, it is a war that you have to fight on multiple fronts. It's not just the one front of I'm just gonna do this one thing. But speaking of a thing where you might do the one thing, and this is the part where the Christians might want to skip ahead. Another very popular abstinence challenge happens every November, and it doesn't have anything to do with your mustache. New Fap November. Which is
listen, man. That's not a. I don't think the Christians. I can't speak for all Christians, but I don't think the Christians
they just don't want to hear about masturbation
at all. Well, I mean, let's be honest. The vast majority of Christians they're human, right? Oh no, they're all human, and they struggle with the same temptations and they struggle with the same vices.
It's one of the biggest addictions
as most
known
people. So
like very prominent to men, and a lot of men will be like, "Oh, I'm not addicted." Stop. Don't do it then. See if you could stop.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's probably the most common addiction, and it's like a severe addiction, and like all the neurological studies, all the studies that are out there prove that it's not the part of the brain that's like stimulated by sex that it affects, particularly masturbation, pornography. It's the same part that heroin and cocaine affects. It's the addictive. It's the addictive part of the brain that's activated with masturbation, pornography.
But like you read the articles, majority of mainstream scientific articles will put out and be like, oh, there's no negative effects. It's healthy to do it every once in a while. It's unhealthy to abstain. You know, that's what they'll say a lot of the time. And maybe there's some merit to like physiological, but like neurological, like we're saying, there's a serious addiction that goes on.
Yeah. Oh, like that's proven. That's definitely proven. And what's interesting is that a lot of people are waking up to this on their own. They're like, wait a minute, I've been sold a bag of lies. This is ruining my life.
I was listening to the rapper Logic on a different podcast, and he was explaining, hey, I don't do this anymore. It used to be a problem, and I feel like it ruined me a little bit. Everybody's starting to wake up to it now.
Well, even Billie Eilish, she talked about how like porn completely destroyed her mind.
Well, I imagine most of her music is a destroyed mind. Hey, it's good. It's good music. Like I said, her brother can produce the heck out of that stuff. But
I mean, this is the thing, right? So like when we're talking about this passion of lust, right? This disordered appetite towards sex, getting that under control is important to actually being happy. It really is, and being properly free. And it's certainly one of the hardest. It is one of the hardest because it's such and it's not, the thing is like that appetite, it's not an evil appetite. It's like, it's all animals have it.
It's
a desire to procreate. It's not an evil thing, right?
And hedonism is easier now than it ever was before. All the excess in the world is at your fingertips.
Yeah.
You have a few bucks, you can get more sugar than any of your ancestors have ever dreamed of.
Apparently now it's like when you're like 8 years old, you have access to a phone with like high-speed internet. It's like, are you kidding? Yeah, it's just
insane.
I mean, at that point, it's like how are they supposed to not fall into these
certain states in the U.S.
patterns.
And I think more places should start looking into this. Certain states have started looking into requiring ID to view pornography on websites or anywhere else. Because I mean, already in a gas station, if you're going to go buy a magazine from any of those places, the guy's going to ask you, "Are you 18? Show me ID." All this stuff. It's like you're buying cigarettes. The online version, you don't need anything. And that's why part of the reason why it's so prevalent. So some places have started to introduce legislation to block off this stuff.
Well, it's interesting because this is actually a huge problem in the military, pornography, because it's making the soldiers, it weakens you mentally, it weakens your will. I think anybody who's actually in that addictive pattern, if they're being honest, especially like you know, be honest with yourself. It's true. It weakens the will. It's not fulfilling. You're not proud of yourself when you do it.
And if you're not being honest, prove it.
Yeah,
Stop.
Exactly. Quit.
There's an episode of Seinfeld about that. It's hilarious. They do it. Like, it's like, oh, we'll just do word of honor to the bet. Like a minute later, Kramer comes in the door, slams down his money on the table. It's like, yeah, no, it's hard for people to do this. It's a vice everybody has. You want to prove you're not addicted? Stop.
Yeah, and it's a powerful vice because it darkens the mind, because it's like, because the thing is that appetite is so strong. And it's not an evil appetite in of itself. It's just when it's disordered and you completely lose control of it, it will blind you. And so, for example, actually in World War II, they would dump like loads of basically porn, like naked woman pamphlets.
Who was doing that?
The Nazis. They would dump that over. Yeah, in like times, like they would literally on planes, they would just dump that. These pamphlets, they would fly through. Actually, you saw it in Dunkirk, I think.
Oh.
There's a scene where he sees all these random pamphlets everywhere and he picks it up and it's like, yeah, it's basically pornography. And this was used because they understood, the Germans knew that it would distract them, darken their mind,
Hermann Göring's
weaken their
favorite
will,
department,
and then they would be easier to conquer.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. It's like if men, and not just men but women as well, but particularly the men who are fighting the war, if they're not chaste, their will is not going to be as strong. Their self-discipline won't be as strong, and they're going to be weaker soldiers.
I'm still working on the Green Knight podcast that we did, and that was like a big part of that original story.
It's chastity.
Yeah. And Gowan's chastity. Yeah. It's funny because like nowadays we're like, there's like a big stigma, oh, you're still a virgin and all this stuff.
Yeah. And
you're almost, there's like a shame around not delving into the rest of what society has offered. Stephen Fry, famous atheist, by the way, does a wonderful podcast series about the 7 deadly sins. And he goes over each of them and talks a little bit about them and how we can see them prevalent in our modern society. And those 7 deadly sins are a great way for you to like, okay, what are the things I do and which of them indulge these things? Where am I spending too much time in the comments section indulging my wrath? Where is my sloth? Where is my gluttony? Where is my vanity?
Well, the biggest one being pride, right? That's the...
Yeah, well, it's pride that'll keep you blind to all the others.
Yeah.
I don't have an addiction. Sure.
Yeah.
Stop. I feel like we've touched on everything. Download Hallow... No, I'm kidding. What you should do is follow us at The Forest Creek on Instagram, on Spotify, on youtube.com/@TheRealForestCreek. We're on other social media and podcasting platforms, specifically theforestcreek.substack.com. Our website is coming soon.
Very soon.
Very soon. The Forest Creek Media Productions will soon be open for business, where you can get in touch with us to talk to us about making your dreams come true. You know, you need somebody to produce media. You need somebody to create these quality content and marketing assets for you, and you can get in touch with us to do that at theforestcreek@gmail.com. You can also email us for other things. Let us know what you think about this podcast, and let us know what you think about our other podcasts, and what do you want us to talk about next, to explore next. We're happy to get in touch with you. Just shoot us an email, drop us a comment, hit the like while you're at it, and share it with your friends. We got a lot of fun things coming. We talked a lot about stoicism. We talked a lot about discipline. We talked a lot about Japanese culture, everything. I love everything. I love all philosophy and history. I want to learn everything about it. I want the meaning of, I'm trying to get the meaning of life here.
Yeah, true.
Any avenue that you can
That is the destiny.
point us towards to explore it, we will do that. So just hit us up at the Forest Creek, everywhere you can find us. Happy Lent, everybody.
Happy Lent.
Download. No, I'm kidding.